Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all on the last week of May, spring 2025. And welcome to today's Psychiatry Grand Rounds. My name is Rebecca Muley, and I'm one of the Grand Rounds co-directors, along with Drs. Adi Talati and Dr. Alexander Harris. Next week's Grand Rounds will be presented in person by Dr. Nagar Fani, the Associate Professor at Emory University and Director of the Temporal Interference Neuromodulation Program. The title of her talk will be Neurophysiological Signatures of Minoritized Stress and Neurostimulation Technologies for Stress Relief. We hope that you will join us in person. For information on our future scheduled Grand Rounds, please visit our Grand Rounds calendar online. And if you would like to meet with an upcoming speaker, please email the Grand Rounds co-directors at grandrounds@nispe.columbia.edu. Before we introduce today's speaker, just a reminder that if you are participating via Zoom, please post questions on the Q&A feature, not the chat. Surprisingly, people still do that. I am joined today by Dr. Adi Talati online, who will forward questions to me for our speaker to address, so that we find is the easiest way for our speaker to hear all of our questions from our hybrid attendees. We encourage trainees to consider asking a question, and we will hold a space for trainee questions in person and online. And please also indicate in the Q&A if you are a trainee. Please remember to fill out your CME surveys after the talk. If you would like CME credit for today's lecture, there is a QR code on the table outside for those in person, and the link will be posted in the chat on the Zoom at about 12:15 p.m. And today, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Lawrence Yang as our speaker in honor of his many scientific accomplishments and in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And I just like to make a note of the lovely refreshments and the trainee lunch were funded by our area leads. All the funding for our food and refreshments has been from our area leads to date. And so today's refreshments and trainee lunch were sponsored by Dr. Josh Corden. So I think a little applause for all of our area leads, please, because they're donating from their personal funds. Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Dr. Jacques Ambrose, the Chief Clinical Integration Officer and Senior Medical Director of our Psychiatry Faculty Practice Organization, a child interventionist psychiatrist, up to the stage to formally introduce Dr. Yang. Thank you.
Aloha kaku, everyone. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lawrence Yang. He is a professor and chair of the Department of Social and Behavioral Science at NYU School of Global Public Health. Dr. Yang is also a founding director of the Global Mental Health and Stigma program, where he administers a generous donor gift from the Lee Ka-shing Foundation and associate director for the Global Center for Implementation Science at NYU. Dr. Yang's research focuses on two main areas: stigma, global mental health, and implementation science, and cognition of untreated psychosis. Dr. Yang is also the PI of multiple R01s implementing task-sharing measures for global mental health. Dr. Yang has over 190 peer-reviewed publications, including publication in JAMA Psychiatry, American Journal of Public Health. Dr. Yang has received 7 national awards, most recently the 2021 Maltz Prize for Innovation and Promising Schizophrenia Research from the Brain and Behavioral Research Foundation for his work. Please give a warm round of applause for Dr. Yang.
Thank you so much for this gracious invitation and the warm introduction. I see a number of familiar faces here today, and I'm really glad to see some of my old friends and colleagues who have come out for this talk today. So first of all, I just want to, I must note, of course, the times that we are in, and I understand, that we are in difficult times as, parts of academic institutions and the missions that we all undertake. So I want to note that. I also understand that this is a place, I had a faculty member just say to me that the Grand Rounds is a place where, people can come together, maybe be transported away into an intellectual or clinical issue. I will do my best to do that for you today. I do want to say I'm delighted to give this talk for AAPI Heritage Month. It is a testament to NISP and Columbia's values to invite me for this talk here today on this topic. In all honesty, it actually enables me to come back to some of the roots, really the fundamental roots of my work as an academic, as I'll describe to you in just a little bit. And lastly, I just want to note that I started my career at Columbia. I was a postdoc at Mailman, and I was faculty for over a decade. And I really do consider Columbia to be my first academic home. So it's really lovely to be here today. So the title of my talk is Identifying What Matters Most Among Chinese Americans to Counter Stigma and Increase Engagement with Mental Health Services. So no disclosures. We're going to be, hopefully by the end of today's talk, I will be able to impart to you 3 different lessons, we'll call them. So to gain critical perspective on the mental health stressors that Chinese American groups face, but then really B and C are the heart of it, to formulate how culture, through this concept of what matters most, I'll be talking a lot about that, can both exacerbate and protect against stigma, and to be able to conceptualize how cultural influences via what matters most can be used to enhance mental health service engagement among Chinese Americans. So my talk is broken up into 3 parts. The first 2 are relatively short, so who I am, both professionally and personally. I want to give you a brief overview around mental health among Asian Americans and, in terms of contemporary times. And the heart of my talk is around what matters most and stigma. So as noted by Ambrose, I do work in 2 areas. I'm not going to talk about global mental health at all today, although a substantive amount of my work is in that area. I'm going to focus on stigma of health conditions. My training, as you're going to see reflected in my talk, is highly interdisciplinary. So I'm trained in clinical psychology, psychiatric epidemiology, and really featured here today, medical anthropology. I'm currently chair of a highly interdisciplinary department, and I've had the good fortune of being PI of several NIH awards at this point, also published and been recognized for my work in this area. So who I am personally, I feel like this is important to get into given the nature of my talk today. So I am a 2nd generation Chinese and Taiwanese American. I was born in the US in San Francisco. My parents are professional, came in as professionals. They did their, undergrad and graduate school in the US. I grew up in Westchester County. And so, hello, Dr. Gordon, nice to see you there. Sorry, mental note there. I grew up in Westchester County, and at the time, highly homogeneous, very white-dominated environment. I experienced a great deal of discrimination just growing up in such an environment. So the work that I do around stigma discrimination really comes from a deep place. It is work that I really, attack and embrace with my entire being, as many of you do as well in terms of, your own clinical work and research. At the end of my PhD, I was able to, travel to China, and I lived there for 2 years. And I studied stigma of Chinese families of people with schizophrenia. And so that was an incredible immersive experience for me. I learned the language for the first time in my life. I could communicate, to my parents in their native tongue after I came back. It was an enormously transformative experience. It helped me also to understand Chinese culture in a really felt and experiential way. I'll be illuminating to you all theoretically. And then while I was at Columbia, and this is at the very beginning of my career, I did a K Award in Mailman. And the topic was among stigma among Chinese immigrants with experiences of psychosis. And so I'm going to be hearkening back to much of this work during today's talk. So the larger concept, and this is really part 3, but I want to put a placeholder here at the moment, is this concept of what matters most. So as you all know, mental disorder is highly prevalent. 1 billion people met criteria for mental disorder per WHO in 2022. Stigma, we know, acts as a powerful barrier to help seeking. Once you are diagnosed with a mental disorder, it also then can exacerbate and make recovery more difficult. Stigma, my central thesis today, impacts everything about a person's experience. However, it threatens what matters most powerfully and acutely. And so I started out with this work among Chinese immigrants with psychosis, as I'll again talk about quite a bit today. And I developed it over the course of a decade. And you'll see it's anyway, the theoretical grounding is rich and deep. I had the privilege of presenting at the National Academy of Sciences in 2015 on this work around in Stigma. And then, to my great delight and really kind of surprise, it got picked up. This work that had been developed over all this time got picked up in HIV. And so I was invited to join this working group, NIH working group in intersectional stigma in 2020. And I've received NIH awards in this area in Botswana. And then most recently, it's also been picked up in cancer, just again, because of really the theoretical utility of this approach. And so I had the chance to speak at this NCI Global meeting in 2022. So now let me segue to mental health in Asian Americans. Again, I just want to give you a broad overview here of the sort of, the general issues facing our group. So number one, Asian Americans, rapidly increasing group population-wise. 46 million Asian Americans projected to be in the US by 2060. There has been a rapid increase over the last 2 decades, 88% increase. And the 3 biggest groups are Indian, Chinese, and Filipino. I'm going to really focus on the Chinese group today. A majority of Asian Americans are foreign-born, and we are projected to be the largest immigrant group in 2055. A little dense here. Let me give you a couple takeaways. All right, so here, this slide is really represents mental disorders among Asian Americans and white Americans, 12-month prevalence, and it's different mental disorders. So we have any mental illness, SMI, or major depressive episode. This data is taken from the NSDUH with the accompanying limitations. It's been assessed by the K6 and HUDAS. So these are self-report items. So there are limitations, associated with that. But let me give you the big takeaways here. All right. So this has been found over time. Asian Americans, for whatever reason, endorse lower rates of mental illness compared to whites. All right. And this is from 2020 to 2022, most recent data that we have available. This has been, repeated. A consistent finding. And, there are lots of different potential explanations for this. There could be, sort of cultural expression of disorder, issues. This is work that Roberto is, world expert on. It could be that our detection systems are not well set up to, detect psychiatric distress among Asian American groups. So that's one sort of takeaway. But the other takeaway here is that you see an uptick in mental disorders among Asian Americans in this period, which happens to correspond, not coincidentally, with the COVID pandemic. And so for major depressive episodes, you can see here, this actually represents a 50% increase from 2020 to 2022. And so mental health issues are, an acute issue and worsening, in the Asian American community, at least, in recent times. There are a couple other overarching issues that apply to Asian American groups. Number one, they're the ethnic group that is least likely to receive mental health treatment. Only 36% of Asian Americans with any mental illness have received mental health treatment. This compares to whites, 56%. Asian Americans, again, lowest group in terms of ethnicity. And English language is a factor. So 57% of Chinese adults cited limited English proficiency as contributing to difficulties in accessing care. So again, don't get treated. Language is an issue. And, as a potential explanation, during the pandemic, the prevalence of depressive symptoms was more than 3 times higher during the pandemic, among Asian American groups. And the reasons are, pretty fairly attributable to discrimination. So there's race-specific discrimination. So for instance, that others think that, Asian Americans are responsible for the COVID-19, sort of spread of COVID-19. Who could forget the unfortunately immortal phrase of, the Wuhan virus. And so this is certainly a factor. And then another factor are non-race specific factors that could disproportionately affect Asian Americans. So for instance, a lot of restaurants closed during this period. and Asian Americans disproportionately are restaurant owners. So, just to let me sum up this section. Mental disorders, again, ticking up in the most recent period. Discrimination, big issue, COVID-related. We don't have the most recent data in the last several years, but my guess, there are almost certainly overhangs from this period, and especially given our current political climate. All right, on to the third part, and this is really the meat of my talk. What matters most in stigma? So I'm going to smile over at Roberto here. So this is my homage to Arthur Kleinman. For those of you who do not know Arthur Kleinman, he is a renowned medical anthropologist at Harvard. I had the chance to go work with him in 2006 at the very beginning of my K Award. And Arthur is, the most brilliant person I've ever met. I should say that's number one. And number two, has really advanced, this area and this core concept of moral experience, what matters most, all that takes place within local worlds. And he's probably best known for, this book, The Illness Narratives, which is really considered, essential reading for physicians, nurses, clinicians in training. I had the opportunity to have dinner with Arthur maybe about 2 years ago, and I actually asked him, to over a 40+ year career, such a distinguished career, what are the things that you're most proud of? And he shared with me, he said, the fact that, he named a bunch of things, but then he said, the fact that I stuck with an idea for 40 years of my career, and I've continued to, advance it all throughout the course of my career. This is one of the things that, he told me he was most proud of. And so, this has really stuck with me. I have had the great benefit of being able to take this idea and apply it to stigma, as I'll be describing to you on the next slides. So in 2006, Arthur would meet with me every week. So holy cow, it was the most intellectually grueling period of my life. He would literally hand me a 300-page ethnography on Chinese social organization and say, let's talk about this book next week. All right, so I didn't have a lot of money back then, so I would go to the library and I photocopy every single one of these books. So you can see them here. And then I would go back to my apartment and I would just take extensive notes. This is actually on the back of these thick packets. I have notes from these different pages about reflections about, this concept, that concept, okay? It has a very special place in my office. I still have all these materials. So it's sort of a sacred place in my office. I also did a set of readings with Arthur, classic philosophers, so Bourdieu or Kant. It gave us the theoretical heft for, to produce these next pieces that I'll be, describing to you now. So we published the piece in 2008. And again, like I said, it's such a joy to be able to talk about sort of, the things like the intellectual heart of your work, like today. So let me bring you through, boil down Chinese social organization in some in three concepts. And of course, going to be a little bit of an oversimplification. However, and please note, I'm really talking about traditional Chinese groups. So you can think about, for instance, rural China in a village. But, and so of course, China is very different today. Asian Americans, incredibly different. However, I do think there are lessons to be learned from understanding these really traditional concepts and how they can apply to Asian Americans and mental health. And I'll be getting into that today. So this first concept is renxing. This is the core dynamic of reciprocity. So every cultural group has rules around give and take, right, in relationships. In US culture, my understanding is you do me a favor, I do you a favor, right? It's about the same magnitude. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You don't want to make me uncomfortable. That's like, sort of the laws of the land, okay? In Chinese culture, traditional Chinese culture, it's actually not that at all right? It is actually highly structured so that if you do me a favor, I must do you the favor +1. And then at some future date, you must do me that favor +2. And then so on and so forth. The most insulting thing is if I return a favor of the equal magnitude to you, because that means I want to sever the relationship. I want to have nothing to do with you moving forward. Okay, so that's number one, reciprocity. I'll say reciprocity, but it means renxing. The second concept is social exchange networks, or this concept of guanxi. And so the social networks work in one way very similar to the US. So let's say I'm a part of this blue person group, and someone wants me to connect, them to another person in the blue person group. So I say, okay, yeah, I'll make that connection. So you share social ties. That's one thing. However, again, in traditional Chinese groups, you can actually borrow materially from within this group. So essentially, if I'm allowed access into this guanxi network, I can actually borrow from any one of these other people, money, capital, et cetera, et cetera. The reason I can do that is because I must always demonstrate this reciprocity, right? Because if I borrow from you, then you understand that, oh, I'm going to have to give you back, X amount of dollars, X plus one at some point, right? And so you must always show the first in order to participate in the second. This third concept I'll talk a little more about today, lian or face. So this is upholding reciprocal obligations that lead one to lay claim to being a respected person in your local world. And here, these reciprocal obligations are primarily familial. They can also be community-based. I'll describe these later on. What binds us all together is perpetuation of one's lineage as a core goal. And again, I'll describe this more in coming slides. All right. So to become an adult in traditional Chinese society is a process of extensive cultivation, and children are not seen as having adult status, when they are sort of young, and so they're not yet seen as full people. So this is actually the Chinese term for adult. So it's 成人. If you translate it literally, it actually means complete person. Okay, so a child is an incomplete person. They're not fully formed. The way that they become fully formed is they learn everyday morality that is transmitted through family life. So parents, and children are obligated to one another. They have to care for one another. First of all, parents raise children every single day, are there providing material support, emotional support, et cetera, et cetera. But then the children have to perform lineage obligations through a series of family transactions. And so you're obligated to do this, for your parents. To not provide food for one's parents merits public scorn. So a common taunt in rural Taiwan is to mock a useless person as a rice pot. So you only eat rice, you don't actually produce it for your family, for your parents. So the obligation to keep parents well fed doesn't just extend to when they're alive. It also extends to when they pass on to the next life. Through religious offerings to their spirits. And so if neglected, these spirits are thought to become hungry ghosts who must be appeased by the general community. And so, even in my family, in Taiwan, different parts of Taiwan, some of my family's homes have, ancestor shrines, and it's different times of the year, you honor the ancestors, you leave food out, et cetera, et cetera. So the obligations are, honor the ancestors, all right? So those who've come before you, but also you have an obligation to continue your lineage. So it's your children, but not just the children who are alive, but you are sort of metaphorically thinking about their children, and it's this process of being in this immortal line. This includes providing lifetime financial support and again performing rituals. And so this process is an immersion into internal chain of filial children. This is and let me pause here for a second because, when people think about working with Chinese Americans, Asian Americans as a cultural group, you think family, right? Family's so important, right? And typically people think about it's the temporal family, but it's not just the temporal family. It is actually the immortal family. It's the people, again, the ancestors who've come way before you and the ones who are yet to be born. And you are part of this. You represent this family line. And so to become a true adult is to be connected to others and to uphold obligations. Failure to do so is to be less than human, or again, to, lose your respect of personhood. Okay, let me bring a very concrete example here. So this is in San Francisco, Chinatown. This is a grandfather. He lives in a, government funded apartment. And so in order to do grocery shopping, his adult son comes and carries him up 3 flights of stairs. This happens several times a week because, there's no elevator in the building. So, and he does this without complaint. So the interviewer asks the son, why do you do this? And the son says, because I'm his son. And also, when I get older, my son will do the same thing for me. Okay, so it's I'm doing this now, but this is the obligation that my children will incur, and then their children and their children, et cetera, et cetera. I'm gonna bring us a little more deeply here, okay? So please just hang with me here. So, face. When I did all those readings with Arthur, there are really two. You can break face up into two sort of sub-concepts, okay? So one is 面子 and the other is 脸. Right now, in current society, these two are pretty interchangeable. People don't really distinguish. If I talk to Chinese person or a Chinese American, and I use these concepts, they basically refer to the same thing, according to sort of contemporary thought. But in sort of more historic China, 面子 was actually more attributable to this social status or social standing. And so what this is, you can think of it as, what is social standing? Where you went to school, right? What kind of job do you have? What kind of car do you have? Where do you live, right? So 面子 you can think of as, I think of it as continuous, right? It could be 0 to infinity. It can be won. It can be lost, right? And that's very important. 脸 is a different concept. 脸 is one's basic decency, one's basic humanity. And 脸 is determined by, again, upholding reciprocity norms to your family and to the community. The trick with 脸 is that it's more like a dichotomous concept. If you lose 脸, it's a 0 or 1 concept. So if you have it, that's great. But once you lose it, there's really no way of getting it back. And I'll illustrate this in a second. So once you lose your 脸, you can never get your basic humanity back. And the traditional way of coping with this, of a loss of this great grievous loss of face, is to take your own life or to hide away. These are really your only two acceptable options. Again, in traditional China, things are changing, opening up now, but this, was the way it was continues to be in certain parts of China. So what I did with my team at the time, this is about a decade ago, was we actually mapped out all the different ways to say, how do you lose your face, all right? And so this is such an important concept. There are many, many ways to say you can lose your face, all right? One of the simplest ways, 丢面子, okay? And so here you can see numerous ways of saying this, expressing it. They all have their own sort of nuance. There's also a way, once you lose your face, to say, how do you can restore it, okay? So basically, again, if you lose social status, you can, through your really, tremendous personal efforts, you can then earn back your social standing. However, let's take a look at 脸. Once you lose your 脸, or you're being a decent human being, 丢脸, there's no way to regain it back. Okay, so let me just really let you sit with this for a second. There is no way within the Chinese language to even express how to get your 脸 back if you are to lose it. All right. And so the thing is, I found this to be, I presented this to a group of Chinese psychiatrists 10 years ago. And, anyway, maybe there's a way, but I haven't been able to find it so far. I want you to sit with this for a second, because if you have a traditional Chinese person as a client in your office, and you're giving them a mental illness diagnosis, what you're risking is this. What they're risking is this, actually, is the loss of moral face, in which there is no return, okay? Arthur Kleinman talked about this. He calls this social death. It is a social death. Basically, you cease to exist as a person, okay, within your local community. So if there's a takeaway, this is takeaway one, I would say, from this whole talk, all right, is this sort of, incredible, the gravity of loss of face among Chinese groups and how mental illness can trigger this. All right. Let me go on to the second important publication that came from my work with Arthur. And so let me frame this without taking a look at the slide. So we know culture looks different in different settings, right? Stigma looks different. Stigma looks different in Chinese groups, in Botswana, in the United States. It looks different by health condition, schizophrenia, HIV, right? Cancer. So, but there wasn't a way to think about this, I would argue, until we published this in 2007. This is the key sentence in this paper. Mental illness stigma acts in culture-specific ways to impair an actor's capacity to take part in the core everyday engagements that certify one as a fully viable or fully moral member of a local community. Let me say that in much more, this is anthro speak. I'll say this in much more plain language. So we all live within local worlds. In order to be seen as a respected person within a local world, you must participate in a set of activities that are recognized by everybody else as, oh, this person's doing activity ABC, so that makes them a respected person of this local community. Once you stop doing those things, then you would get kicked out from the local world. So stigma, the thesis here, stigma affects everything about a person's experience. However, it most powerfully attacks the capabilities that determine personhood within a local world. And that is my central thesis. And so let me concretize this for you. So stigma will coalesce most forcefully. Futsonese are the Chinese immigrants in New York City. They come from this region of China, of the Fuzhou province. So I'll refer to them as the Futsonese. So it coalesces around, most forcefully around a Futsonese individual's capacity to obtain competitive employment, repay his debt, and fulfill his filial obligations and extend his ancestral line. So this paper, addressed a large gap in the field. It's been highly cited since. So to illustrate this heuristically, this bottom bar is individual social domains radiating out from the individual, so social function, family, life opportunities. Stigma, as we know, affects everything, but it coalesces most powerfully around what matters most. And what matters most is actually empirically discoverable through qualitative methods. So let me bring you back to the local example of the Futsonese. Oh, and I should note here, I started with this concept among the Chinese immigrants, the Futsonese in New York City. Since then, again, we've taken it in all parts of the globe, and all sorts of different health conditions, because it's had such a deep sort of theoretical grounding. It's been applicable to other groups. But back to the Futsonese. So they enter the country under some very disadvantaged structural factors. This again was this was 10 years ago. A network of smugglers, shurto or snakeheads, work together in multiple countries. They're skyrocketing costs coming into the country at the time, 10 years ago, it was $80,000. There's also an immense amount of interest that the immigrants have to pay. And if they do not, 30% or more, if they do not pay off the debt in a timely way, then they are at risk for violence and death from the snakehead gang. Them and their family members are at risk. They come in through sea, land, and air. And Fuzhou province is a pretty, not a wealthy province. Most of it's not a wealthy province. So the folks come in undocumented, and then they're really working in these menial, jobs, basically in these restaurant systems, menial restaurant work. So a healthy Futsonese immigrant who comes in has to work, 5 or 6 years, 60 hours a week in order to pay off the debt. But just imagine if you develop psychosis, right? And then people find out about this, and then the restaurant systems do not hire you. Well, stigma is terrible across all groups. I would argue in this group that it's this possibility of life and death because of this structural vulnerability that they come in under. So this is a photo, Futsonese migrants being detained at the New Mexico border. So during my K Award, I had the opportunity to interview 50 clients with psychotic disorders at Bellevue and at 2 inpatient units, mostly at Bellevue Hospital at NYU. And in order to really learn about this further, we published this in Social Science and Medicine in 2014. And so if you're interested, please take a look. I'm going to give you the core ideas and the big takeaways here. So the questionnaires included stigma, different forms, qualitatively coded, and I'm going to present to you the codes on what matters most. So let me just dive right into it. So I still remember this interview quite vividly. And so I was interviewing this man, early 30s, inpatient unit, Bellevue Hospital. I'm out going through the stigma interview, like a good junior researcher should. And then the man just breaks from my interview, altogether, and excuse me. And he says to me, just to bother you to talk to the psychiatrist for me to be discharged sooner. I myself want to work because my illness is well for more than 2 weeks. I don't know why they don't discharge me. What I mean is that I'm going to help out my parents, my father and mother. Mother still works in the restaurant. She's almost in her 60s and she still has to work. I want to help her just to go to work. That's all. All right. So it's so vivid here. What matters most, obviously, 1, 2, and 3 is to work, right, in this group, given their structural circumstances. Secondly, is you can see the filial, obligations that this immigrant must fulfill, because if he does not, then he will lose face within the, Chinese immigrant community, and then again, potentially suffer social death. So you remember, right? My thesis, right? One of my central theses is that stigma again affects everything, but where it really should hurt a food Sunnis individual the most is around their capability to work. And we found that this to be the case. So let me read you a couple quotes. Have family members look down on you when they find out that you have this condition? No, it's all about your ability. If your ability is good, they will do their best to help you. If not, they will neglect you. Why would the consumers on the unit be looked down on? Because many consumers are looked down by others. What I heard from relatives was that the consumers just become sick, and the relatives think their consumers are useless and would not care for them, that they are unable to make money, and relatives would not come to visit the consumers. And some people are even afraid to pick them up when they're discharged. So you can see here again, it's not just the fact they have schizophrenia and psychosis, it's the fact that they can't work. They do not have this card-carrying, core capability that determines personhood in the setting. So all well and good, we were able to illustrate, a central tenet of the theory. There was actually, during the study, we had a powerful extension of this theory that we, stumbled into. And so just follow me for a second here. What if a person in a local world was able to maintain the capabilities that matter most for respective personhood? Could that then, if they were able to do this, could that then help them to ward off the worst parts of stigma that might be attached to a medical condition like psychosis, schizophrenia? And we actually found this to be the case. So in this case, I'll just jump to the quotes. It's work, obviously. Most people in your community would think people with mental illness would make a person lose face. No, because he goes to work, still goes to work, and he goes home. You said that a person with mental illness continues to work. That is not considered a shameful thing. Yes, right. What do you fear would happen if you tell your friends about your mental illness? The sky will collapse. He's joking. There's nothing that will happen. I'm still young and I have my hands and feet. It's a metaphor. I have my ability to work. I can work in any field, no problem. Besides, I'm married, no problem. So this young man, I also remember this interview, he has the twin capabilities, right? I can work and I'm married, and thus I'm able to continue my lineage. So, can't touch me sort of thing, right? And so this was a very important finding for this theory, because what it does, for the first time, I believe, it gave us a roadmap to counter stigma within different cultural groups and different cultural settings. If we could discover what matters most in, to two different cultural groups, then we could actually try to promote these capabilities in order to really defend against stigma. So this was a big advance, from our theory, and that ties into, the recommendations at the end. Okay, so I've now covered, FACE, its historical origins. I've covered what matters most, how culture can shape and protect against stigma. Now let's talk a little bit about intervening, and I've just, I would say, just made some beginning progress in this area. So again, when one loses face, you lose your status, you become isolated, right? You really become just, an individual person, which in Chinese groups, Chinese social organization is really, a form of social death. Because you lose your social exchange networks, your guanxi networks. Again, you basically lose your core personhood. So we thought, if face is constructed, right, socially, it must also be regained socially. And so we thought that we could actually try to help people regain face through internalized stigma support groups. And so number one, to reduce isolation; two, to create a new social exchange network, a guanxi network; three, to counter discrimination, and to, first of all, regain face within this very local and protected group. the thought here was that if they could then regain or restore their face within this local group, then they could actually go out into the wider community and try to, earn face, earn standing, sort of by the traditional community's norms and standards. So I was able to do this work. So this is work I will say, segue a tiny bit. I had to really continue this work through, I don't know how to put it, love or purpose, I suppose. I had done so much work this community. I felt, morally obligated, to do something for this group. And so I wasn't able to get NIH funding, difficult area to get NIH funding in. But I did do this work through state support, actually county support in Alameda County in California. And so what we did was, it's a small pilot test, but it's a proof of concept. So what we did is we had these groups co-led by a group of facilitators, a clinician, and then peer co-leaders. So these folks had disclosed both, either schizophrenia or depression. We have a 10-week curriculum to reduce stigma. These are all evidence-based practices. We have a manualized, beautiful manualized treatment guide. It contains these principles: psychoeducation, cognitive restructuring, and behavioral coping strategies to counter discrimination. And the participants were 5 to 7 clients with psychosis or depression. This is this publication is under. I'm pointing at Tim, Dr. Becker in the audience there as one of the co-first authors. So this is taking forever to get through the review process, but eventually it will get published. And so I just want to note here, I could talk about these things. I'm not going to talk about these things. It's all pretty, I could walk you through the different worksheets, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that's really, with the spirit of today's presentation. What I'm going to do instead, let me tell you a little bit more about the group. So across the 3 groups that we ran through this curriculum, 19 individuals, primarily Chinese speaking, mostly female, mid-adulthood, 45 years on average. Most of them were not married. Most of them were, undereducated, so had completed high school only or less. Were chronically sick, about 16 years of illness, and 10 had been psychiatrically hospitalized. So these were folks who, most of them weren't working, very isolated, chronically ill. You get the sort of the general picture of it. So what I could do, right, is walk you through all the worksheets, et cetera, how we countered stigma. We think it's, very state of the art, et cetera. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you how, by being in a group and placing these immigrants in a group and giving them a chance to affiliate with one another, they actually reconstituted, these really important ways of being in Chinese culture, of reciprocity, of social network formation, right? And that these, I would argue, were just as powerful in terms of helping them to ward off stigma, regain their face, as our very, well thought out, right, evidence-based practices. So what ended up happening, and this is really remarkable, I thought, there was what would happen. Again, just envision this, right? You've got these folks coming to the group, very isolated, haven't basically extruded from the community. The peer co-leaders were really, really instrumental in the exchange of favors starting to take place between group members. And these were both social and material in nature, as befits, traditional Chinese organization. So I'll give you some examples here. The peer co-leaders tended, to be higher functioning. They were recovered. They had a car. I think, having access to a car was a really, really big thing. And so the peer co-leader would, for instance, these are all examples of how they elicited this reciprocity. So connects a group member to a volunteer position, drives a group member to the volunteer position and home from the group, invites the group members to monthly Chinese NAMI meetings, provides information and connections to employment after the group meeting. This would then start kicking off reciprocity between the group members themselves. So here, 2 group members brought food to share with other members. Group members invited one another to lunch outside of the group. One group member drives 2 others to the Chinese NAMI meeting. One group member gets another member a part-time job at a flower shop. one elder respected group member lends their Buddhist scriptures to help to two other group members to help them to cope with their symptoms. And we documented these things too, because we were, attuned to this, and we documented these things as they occurred across the groups. So as this was happening, and again, my argument here is that, enabling the immigrants to really engage in these core forms of reciprocity to one another, enable them to really, again, affiliate with one another and to create a meaningful Guanxi network. And so this is probably one of the most vivid moments out of any across the three groups. This has actually happened in the very last session. So this is session 10 of one of the groups. And this is a participant. This participant is a 40-ish something-year-old man with a psychotic disorder. And so he opens up to the group that about 5 years ago, he started looking under the bed. When he goes to sleep, he thinks there might be dead people underneath the bed and that there are snakes all over. So he's got, these classic, right, delusions, hallucinations. He knows it's not there, but he feels it really strongly. It scared him so much that he jumped out of bed. I finally talked about this fear with my psychiatrist. Every time I closed my idea, the snakes would come out. It got so bad, I told my psychiatrist. Another participant encourages him, you have to tell your doctor. This participant says, I can't even tell my family doctor or therapist about my fears until a month ago. I didn't want to tell the psychiatrist. Then he continues, I don't even tell my wife. I don't want to burden her. His telling of this to the group is his first disclosure to anyone besides a psychiatrist. So again, he's been suffering, experiencing the symptoms for 5 years. He couldn't even tell his wife. She doesn't know what he's going through because they sleep in separate rooms. And so this encourages then the rest of the group members to then talk about their own symptoms. So again, if I were to sum this up, right? People come in, they're isolated. The group leaders start to encourage this fundamental reciprocity. The Guanxi and the trust starts, they have the meaningful social exchange occur. And then people start disclosing, and that really then strengthens the Guanxi network. It makes the group even more, meaningful, significant in their lives. And it's a way of, again, it's not just trust, but it's, again, this fundamental, right, restoring of personhood and face, again, within this local and protected group. So we did assess this quantitatively. So our main measure, self-esteem decrement, this is moderate, basically 44.8, drops, post-intervention to 30.4. We don't have a comparison group because, again, it was a pilot trial. 32% decrease, and pretty generalized. So 16 out of the 19 folks reported a decrease in this form of stigma. I want to note here, work was not actually part of our curriculum. There are actually ways to encourage work among people with psychosis and schizophrenia, right? We didn't have any of that in there. But what ended up happening after the group was that 4 of the participants gained full or part or full-time paid employment after the group ended. And these were primarily facilitated by the group co-leaders. Many of these folks did not work for many years, and these were jobs that were in the kind of immigrant sector that you might imagine: restaurant, flower shop, NEMI, consumer advocate, and a hospice worker. 3 started volunteering after the group ended. So home visits for elderly Chinese people with depression, church, bringing elderly to the hospital. So again, if I were to zoom out again, right, it's to the remoralization, the regaining of face. We wanted to promote this within this local protected world, local group. And then once they established this, then some of them would go on, to the broader community and actually, right, start to work, start to become socially engaged and integrated, and thus regain their face within the larger community. All right, so this brings me to the end. These are sort of, and again, I want to, take a step back and think about some recommendations for the clinicians in the crowd. So number one, I hope that I'm able to leave you with this understanding of what loss of face really means in a traditional Chinese group, and how grievous it is, and how it can be felt as if, there's no way back. All right, and this is also attached with disclosing mental illness, again, within traditional Chinese groups. So minimization and secrecy is common in these groups, and there's a primary focus on regaining what matters most. Among adults, mostly it's work. Among children, it's education. Education is the corollary, basically, to work among Chinese American kids. All right, and so there's going to be this inordinate focus on, I have to do well in school, I have to do well in school. And so just some thoughts for the clinicians in the crowd to acknowledge the fears, be patient in providing diagnosis, and then as much as possible, orient the treatment as regaining, helping the patient to regain what matters most, right? You're going to be able to achieve these things if you, engage in therapy or engage in, medication. These things will gradually help you to restore these capabilities. In terms of restoring faith, again, I think, so this is what I learned from doing these groups to help folks to engage in reciprocity with new group members via traditional forms of exchange, so gift giving in order to enhance the social network, encourage selective disclosure to broaden restricted social networks, and then eventually empower folks to regain their moral faith by working and fulfilling filial obligations in the larger community. Again, when they're ready, after they've been in a protected group and feel like as if they've, regained their personhood again. So, of course, there's a huge caveat. We have to be aware of differences in acculturation levels. So I am talking about, largely Chinese speaking. I'm talking about folks who have, immigrated in. So of course you have to assess the client's endorsement and adherence to these values and adjust your approach accordingly. However, I will say, and I can only speak for myself, and I would love to see some Asian American faces in the crowd here. I'm a second generation Asian American, born in the US, highly educated, okay? I'm quite Americanized by many standards. I will tell you something. As I learned about all this, I studied it, I realized that in many ways, I also live this, the things that I do in my world, in my everyday life, it's not just for me, it's never just for me. It is about also, again, it's about my family and like their ancestors and, my kids and their future kids and all, it's somewhere, it gets embedded in one's subconscious even, it's not even something that you can easily articulate, I would say. And so I think that, I think that these deep cultural lessons can really be useful, okay, as a potential roadmap when you're engaging with Asian and Chinese American clients. So today, what I did, I'll return to the three primary lessons. We talked about discrimination and mental disorders among Asian Americans, especially in regards to the recent COVID pandemic and discrimination related to the COVID pandemic. I've illustrated how culture via what matters most can both worsen and protect against stigma. And then lastly, how what matters most can be used to enhance mental health service engagement among Chinese Americans and to help to, gradually restore faith, all right? I think the key takeaway here is that faith is primarily socially derived, and so therefore it must also be socially, regained. I also want to note, as someone in their second decade of research or so, you sort of branch out to do different things. I still do a little bit of work in this area. I think of myself more as a bridge, honestly, to the new generation of Asian American mental health researchers. I want to just highlight one local example, Dr. Wenhua Liu. She's just got tenure, associate professor at CUNY in public health. She's PI of a U54, empowering Chinese American adolescents and parents for mental health help seeking. I'm calling on this grant. What is wonderful about this is that we've taken the curriculum that we've developed for Chinese immigrants with SMI and actually brought it over and adapted it for parents and youth and largely more acculturated groups within New York City. So I'm incredibly pleased to see this work live on in a different subgroup. I want to note one last thing before I wrap up. I am in the midst of a professional transition myself. I am leaving for Duke, leaving NYU for Duke. I start on August 1. I'm been given a very nice title, the School of Nursing, and I'll be starting a center on stigma and health outcomes. So I'll be looking at stigma across multiple health conditions, and so. To return to the lessons that Arthur has, given me, certainly, I'm in year 20, I would say, of what matters most in stigma. I've got maybe, if I'm lucky, maybe, who knows, 20, 25 more years to go. I'm really excited to take this, to take the lessons that we've learned so far, applied it in this Chinese American group, as I've spoken about today, but really excited to take it forward globally, other conditions, to really try to promote well-being among marginalized groups worldwide. So thank you so much, and welcome questions.